Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of StreamTime Sports. My name is Chris Stone. I'm the community lead at Sports Pro Media, joined as always by our CEO, Nick Meacham. Now, Nick, me and my friends have a holiday December tradition. We start the day by going bowling at Lewisham Lanes in southeast London. We then go to a Dulwich Hamlets FC football game, which I think they're like 7th, 6th tier in England, which means it's technically non-league. So you can drink beer during the game. Those that don't know, you can't drink beer at a Premier League game or a championship game. You can only drink before the game and at halftime. So you get to go do that, keep the social things going. And then we go out for a big curry. And what I've realized, Nick, is that for 3 years running, I've bought a pair of gloves. And for 3 years running, I've lost a single glove. And every single year, it's been the left glove. So when I woke up this morning, woke up the morning to go do that, I realized I had 3 gloves, all of them for my right hand. So I had to go buy another pair. If I could have just lost the right one time, I'd have at least had one pair. But I basically have 3 right-handed gloves.
That's impressive work. What do you think? Do you use your phone on your left hand on the phone, perhaps? So you left it off? Is there some sort of trait that you do?
So one of them I know for sure I lost. The first year I lost it cycling. I got a little warm with gloves in my pocket. I know for a fact I lost it there. The other 2, I'm not sure where. Because the thing is, I'm right-handed, so when I usually wear gloves, I'm at football. So if I'm going to throw, I'm going to be taking off the right glove. So I don't really know. It doesn't make sense, Nick. But it was rather inconvenient when I was looking for a pair of gloves on a cold December day and realized I've exclusively lost the left glove for 3 straight years.
It's like the dreaded washing machine keeps eating my socks, and I still don't know where. I've got 3 right socks. 2 right socks and a left sock just missing. And I'm like, damn it, why do these socks have to be different patterns on left and right? I can't just. So now I just buy 7 packs of black socks, and then I'm just good there. I don't have to worry about it. So I could lose them, but I won't even realize until it's a few years down the line. I've only got 1 pair left. Dulwich Hamlets, for those it's a really interesting story, because I almost think they don't want to really go up. They're not that excited by it, right? For paint the picture a little bit for audiences about the uniqueness of Dulwich Hamlets.
Well, I would say that our Black Book editor, Kean, would be upset because I believe he's a season ticket holder, goes very frequently. I just go once a year. But yeah, like I said, it's non-league, so they play Saturdays, and they've got a really great community. They really stand up for the LGBTQ community. So it's a very inclusive football club. It's dog friendly, which I love. They've got some really good gyros, however you pronounce it, some good Greek food. They've got a bar with some local breweries that, serve their beer there. And they probably average maybe, I don't know, around 2,000 people a game, roughly, maybe a little bit under that. But it's not a small crowd. They've got an actual small stadium and whatnot, but it's just a really good vibe. And I think, to your point, Nick, if they went up a league or 2, there's certain rules by the FA that your venue has to have certain requirements in order to compete at that level. And then all of a sudden, some of the bar food areas that it's quite known for, all of a sudden you can't have the bar available, and it starts to lose some of the community feel. It's every time we've been there, it's super friendly. Everyone's interested in football, but no one's there with any of the hooliganism. You don't show up to the game. If I go to a West Ham game, I'm expecting some verbal abuse and, the types of things I wouldn't bring a young child to or bring my mother along with me. But Dulwich Hamlets is a really nice, family day out. So they've got a really great community down there. It's a really inclusive community. The food, the drink, it's great. Yeah, it's a really good vibe for, a non-league football team. But yeah, I don't think they want to go up, because if they go up, all of a sudden they lose some of what makes them them.
I wonder are there any other sports that you're aware of where they don't serve alcohol during the matches like that? Because I know they do in the UK. They do for rugby, for the professional leagues, obviously, because not for the non-league leagues you just described. I'm wondering if any other pro sports or leagues have that same issue. I think it's pretty unique to English football, I think.
It's the only one I'm aware of, because I know when the West Ham lot, back when they were playing European football, would go abroad, if they went to Germany, they could drink during the games. And I remember there's a story last year, they said baseball teams were on average looking to lose something like $20 million a year. Because I don't know if you knew this, Nick, with the new pitch clock in baseball, it shortened the games. And in baseball, to reduce drink driving, they don't serve beer after the 7th inning. And they said because games were shortened, because of the new pitch clock rule, the teams are on average going to lose $20 million a year on
Wow.
alcohol sales. So, when I think of American sporting events, like it's certainly a prominent part of it. So, yeah, it's a bit of a shame that people can't behave because you could take the same people at a West Ham game and take them to cricket or take them to rugby, and they'd probably be just fine. I don't know what it is about football that gets people so worked up.
Well, I think it's a bit of that tribalism and also a legacy of, I don't know how long that rule's been in place for, but it has been in place for a long time. Like, must be decades, 20, 30 years, I would think at least. Probably when the peaks of hooliganism perhaps were in place. I wonder if they did release that, would it take be a bit of a reduction in the pressure valve? You know what I mean by that is like people then feel like those who like a drink loads before the game, get themselves take it too far, then scrambled. There's not a lot of time at a half time to really grab a drink there, and then they're they're on the downhill spiral after that. Maybe if you tapered it out, maybe it would be better. I'm not sure.
I was gonna say, I bet I know who knows the answer, and it'll be Steve McCaskill.
Well, next time he's on the show, we're going to have to ask him for the answers because he's always an encyclopedia of knowledge. That's for sure.
Grill him down on that. So today, Nick, this episode, when it comes out, will be coming out right around the new year. And, it's always a good time to reflect and also look forward. And for today's episode, we just kind of wanted to go through some things, reflections of, 2024, but also looking forward to questions that we still have for 2025. So it's a little bit of fun to kind of be able to reflect on some different things and also look forward. And yeah, I guess, Nick, I've got some things I want to talk about, but is there anything in particular that stands out for you that stood out as, maybe a bit prominent in 2024 that's unique?
The main thing that stood out for me in terms of things that have happened is I think Netflix's official arrival into the live sports space. They've been spending money, they've been delivering events, doing deals, they've been putting the money where their mouth is. And actually, well, their mouth wasn't even there really beforehand because they were saying they weren't really that interested in the space, but they found their own path, their own journey, and they seem set up to basically continue that approach moving into the new year. So that's probably been the biggest change or evolution from a single organization perspective. I think the other one is just how quickly the conversation around advertising is going, which we've talked about on the previous pod recently, and also just people now much more accepting of the role YouTube can play. So they're probably the three major trends I would be saying have really stood out for this year.
Yeah, on a macro level, one of the things I wrote down is maybe it'll be 3 years time, 5 years time. Well, we look back at 2024 as being kind of a next, if you think about there's different eras for things, will this be kind of the new era for streaming? Because you mentioned Netflix is a massive entry into this, but then we're also seeing things like ESPN is now fully committing to having ESPN Plus, and I think as of now there actually is some live sports programming on Disney Plus. You're seeing, it's not just this year, but YouTube's now got Sunday NFL Ticket. Amazon now has Thursday Night Football. It seems like more and more we're getting to a precipice with streaming, and we're starting to get the Apples, the Amazons, and Netflix being the last one there to really join. Do you feel like, we might look back in 3-5 years and say this time period with Netflix joining is going to kind of be the start of a new era of streaming, or is that perhaps being a little too caught up in the now?
No, I think it's a fair question. I'd say them coming to the table with an established subscriber base of over 250 million subscribers globally, the only legitimate, profitable organization at serious scale in our space. It's a real sense of validation of the power that sports has, and that last hurrah of being an appointment viewing experience that most are still seeking to find to stand out from the crowd. So that's been good for the industry, I think, just to see that they're there. For the bigger ticket items at the moment, they're all now excited about another serious competitor or another serious player potentially being a partner. I think the bigger thing, though, has been more the shift or the shifting approach by a number of the bigger players on being an aggregator and focusing on aggregation over their own sets of rights. Netflix has not done that. They've taken their own approach on acquiring and launching some initiatives themselves. But Amazon's been very clear to prioritize aggregation. DAZN have, YouTube's focused and built on that. Then you have some of the MVPDs also doing similar and trying to be a destination for fans to come to on more than just a single live event experience. That, I think, has been quite the shift that the industry needed. It's still going to have to continue to evolve a lot more. And again, we'll see in the future, will a Netflix or a like take that approach as well, because they've certainly got the reach that everyone would be super excited about tapping into if I was running a sports property. That's for sure.
Well, we've talked about Netflix as one of the potential candidates, whether they ever actually do it or not. It seems like it would make sense for them to enter into a joint venture with a sports streaming platform. But one of the other things I sort of talked about, and not all of these took place necessarily in 2024. Some of them are a little bit more dated than that. But you start thinking about BT Sport with Discovery becoming TNT Sports in the UK, thinking about, the TKO joint venture between the UFC and WWE, Venue Sports, if that does or does not ever get launched with, ESPN, Fox Sports, Warner Brothers Discovery. More recently had things on a smaller scale with like Fubo and The Athletic. There's the impending PGA Tour, Live Golf, Skydance, Paramount. Maybe I've not been in the industry long enough to say, but it feels like compared to, my previous 5 years at Sports Pro, there's been more of these either mergers or acquisitions of media businesses, sports properties, than there's perhaps been in the past, even the joint ventures. Does it feel like to you, Nick, that is the case, that there seems to be a few more of these happening than what's normally happened historically? And, what does that actually mean going forward?
We've seen mergers and acquisitions happen throughout the course of the media industry, but it does feel like this year we've seen a particular acceleration or a period of time where that's been really brought to the forefront. And I think that's partially because of the acceptance of the industry that building this paywall gated platform is not the way to work to try and make everyone come to your place. You need to be in lots of other places and work with others to make sure you're as visible as possible with as greater reach as possible. Direct subscription revenue alone is never going to cut it. And so that's where most smart players have accepted that and realize they have to expand their resources, expand their scale, expand their partners, and find a different way to approach things than they have been today. But if you look at where we were just a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago, every company was just trying to build their own hub, their own destination. But it was always going to be doomed at some stage. Something had to bring those things together. So this sort of merger approach we've seen and these bigger partnerships is a great first step. We're still going to need more of a central hub at some stage where all these companies are really present. And honestly, like the likelihood of that being a Netflix is super high, I think, down the line. Yeah, they become the one-stop shop for everyone to go to consume and access their content. At the moment, we've still got to bounce around a bunch of different platforms. But there's a lot of debt running around the industry. That's played a huge role. You've got to minimize costs, minimize your debt. The valuations of media businesses gone down because of the what's happened on the stock market. That has had a huge impact. So all of those are sort of symptoms of why you would see more of these mergers and acquisitions. I'd expect you see a bunch more coming in the near future. More, firstly, more smaller ones getting ingested into the bigger companies and adding another layer to them. But I wouldn't be surprised to see someone else make a pretty big move in the near future.
So when I first joined, it was really when cord cutting was the big thing. The whole reason for doing it is you didn't want to have all the channels you didn't want to watch. So you would just pay for the subscriptions that you wanted. But then you ended up with so many subscriptions, became a little overwhelming. And then basically you sort of realized like this was a lot easier when everything was just in one place. And it feels to a degree some of these joint ventures, mergers are kind of bringing that back together, where Discovery obviously has sports, but like it has a whole catalog of other things where when it brings in BT Sport, it just adds that to the collection. In terms of what, I don't know, I feel like I'm aging myself, Nick. I feel like I'm not old enough to be talking in this way, but like when we think back to like what TV was before this whole cord cutting era, it does seem like it's starting to come back together. What do you think the sports industry or perhaps the media industry has learned that as it starts to come back together, that it maybe won't repeat the same things? Or is it just a cyclical thing where maybe we will end up back again, splitting everything back out again?
I think sports as an industry has learned that it's not the holy grail anymore. It's one type of content that works as part of an entertainment mix. Come for the sports day for the entertainment concept we've talked about through Fubo and alike is absolutely what the industry has come to grips with. So if I still think there is a place for sports only destinations if they have enough sports on the books. So the concept of venue sports was a good concept in theory. but you're still leaving 40% of content was not going to be available on that platform. But the mix between just being a destination with the right sort of content and what is most likely to keep people for as long as possible on the platform, not just focusing on that top tier fan, but indeed just what general consumers are interested in. Yeah, it's sports is just one piece of the entertainment puzzle. And I think now that sports generally has come to grips with that, most of the major broadcasters and streaming platforms have come to grips with that. I think that's why we've seen the top end get stronger and the middle basically just losing a bit of air and losing a bit of momentum in doing rights deals because they don't generate any meaningful return of moving audiences at that scale. That's been the trickiest bit for the sports to uncover. Is basically the tier twos and below have to just take a different approach to everyone else in the tier one category, which is really unfortunate because that means you can't model yourself against the most successful platforms. You've got to find your own way. But that's the other bit we've seen of all this year is just the increased interest in advertising, digital sponsorships, and starting to see that slowly kick off in Europe, which is really where it's needed most.
Well, we're going to talk about those tier twos when we start discussing what are our questions for 2025. But the last question I at least have, the last topic I want to discuss, sort of looking back at 2024, is we've now got the NBA deal. And once the NFL wrapped up its deal, we sort of looked at the NBA deal as kind of the last big one that we would see for a while, at least from a U.S. perspective, because we've talked about in Europe with competition law. We don't usually see quite as long of deals, but the Premier League does have their next deal signed. We've talked about the Bundesliga has their next deal signed. League One has had its deal. I think La Liga might have some conversations coming up. But in Europe, we've talked about there's a little bit of a stagnation taking place. The NFL managed to massively overperform its rights deal. The NBA, I'll be honest, I was surprised at how big of a jump it took. I knew it was going to be big. I don't think I expected it to be as big as it was. We've talked quite a bit about profitability. Obviously, profitability is difficult when you're paying incredible sums of money for these premium rights. Do you think, looking back 2024, this NBA deal might be the last deal that we see where the increase is such a dramatic number? It's not that I think the NFL is all of a sudden not going to make more money, but this idea that you're going to double, triple your worth, does it seem like those days are probably gone?
I would love to think otherwise, Chris. I would love to say that, yeah, there is the days to come of all this extra revenue coming in. I think what we're ultimately going to see by the time the next cycle comes around, a different approach to media rights at some stage. Maybe the NFL and maybe others can keep a unique approach with media rights, but I think most you're going to see come up with a completely different model, a rev share model, a shared profit, shared risk reward model that almost everyone's going to go into. And that doesn't mean that people like the NFL and the NBA can't still walk away with even more money than they've been creating. But I can't see how they'll continue to work in a model where there's all this upfront risk and cost associated to companies to work it out as they go along. Again, NFL might be the exception, but in general terms, I think you're just going to see like what YouTube's impact is how people are seeing the opportunity. That's what social media and big tech's been after for so long, and they've struggled to get through the sports because those big checks have been out there. I think by then, you're talking several years from now, I think by then, I think you will see the tide shifting, and it could still be super lucrative, but they'll be able to work out the modeling to go, actually, we do this sort of shared risk reward with you, NBA. We think you're going to make it a lot more money on top. Maybe that'll be something they come to the table with. I think one of the reasons the NBA has been so impressive in what they've generated, it's a lot to do with how much they've invested in the rule changes they made to social media before anyone else did about the use of clips, about allowing creators to make content and just letting that grow on social so that the audience and the impact that NBA and the brands and the audiences that the players have is so significant that it is pretty much unique to any other sports property that I can think of, even in comparison to the NFL. The NFL is still very much a team sport with a bunch of players that are well known, but the NBA, the personalities come out so much more because of the size of the team. They're not wearing helmets. They've been able to use and create brands for such a long time. Basketball as a culture is so part of the US ecosystem. I think they've just done that's one of the reasons they've been able to get away is not the right word, but build up the value of those rights. And I think that's valued in the deals they've been doing, that they can be part of the culture more than just here's some live games to have in your locker and arsenal.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head there, because one of the things I find, it's totally anecdotal. I don't follow enough people on social media. I don't have enough data on social media to say it's true. But I see reports about NBA numbers being down in terms of viewership. But when I'm on Twitter, and maybe we'll have a conversation about Twitter X, what it means in Bluesky in 2025, but it feels like the fandom is massively there. It doesn't feel like there's anything wrong with the fandom in terms of coverage, the amount of highlights I see, the amount of discourse I see, but it doesn't seem to match up with what I see from the TV ratings. I think, to your point, it's that conversation around it is probably more than just these are the games that are available on broadcast, and so much more about the larger community around it. Because, like, judging by, and granted, my social media algorithm is very much focused around like sports. If it's not sports, I just instantly block it. Like, I'm very, but what I see on NBA Twitter is just as loud, prominent as NFL Twitter, as college football Twitter. But then I just see the ratings aren't performing the same way. And whether it's because it's not free to air or whatever it is, I find it interesting because the community doesn't seem to be backing away from the sport at all, despite what it might be saying about TV ratings.
No, I think that the tricky part that sports has to overcome, it's not just next year, it's next year's on that journey, but it's going to be over the next 5 to 10 years, is how does sports gain just authentic value or the real true value of a fan in return? So what I mean by that is I could be the most passionate NFL fan in the world. I watch all the highlights on YouTube. I play fantasy sports. I talk to it with my friends constantly, whatever it might be. I could be consuming hours and hours and engage with the sport for hours and hours and hours. And in theory, at the moment, the NFL would get maybe a couple of pennies for my consumption time with the sport, maybe through YouTube, YouTube consumption if I'm watching highlights through YouTube. But maybe not. Like if I'm watching through unofficial channels or just through creators, then the NFL might get zero out of that. The only way they make money is if you're watching the live game through their partners. Primarily, there's a few other small ways, right? But that conundrum of super fan, the sport makes nothing, someone who might just have it as part of their subscription mix at home on their cable provider, or stumble across it in other means, or might just be paying for it but might only watch one game a week. How is that definitively worth more than the other? How does that paradox, I'd suppose you call it, of a massive fan of the sport, lives and breathes the sport, reads content consistently, and someone who's maybe watched a game on Thursday night on Prime TV, Prime Video, they're making way more out of the Prime Video customer, yet this fan is way more into their sport. They need to find a way to solve that paradox between those two groups. If they can solve that mix and just they get a true reflection, not chase and rights deals, but just a true reflection. Okay, based on the amount of consumption time this person's have, we should be getting X in return. Like looking at almost like a Facebook or whatever you would be, of like how much return they get by time spent on the platform through ad revenue. But thinking about the whole ecosystem, if they could find a way to make that work, that's the big crystal ball stuff, not next year, but find a way to turn that into value, then it will take the pressure off these rights deals to be so precious, and just make sure the reach is at the scale that every sport ideally wants so they can get it, which is watched by everyone, consumed by everyone, and they find other means to make that pay the bills. So I think that's a big predicament that the industry has to work on over the next 10 years, probably.
For sure. And I feel like to some degree, that's where the Pat McAfees of the world and the Barstools of the world have come in, where there's that audience there where perhaps part of the reason ESPN has done the deal with Pat McAfee is they know Pat McAfee's bringing in that audience on a Tuesday at 1 p.m., which might be a dead zone, but that's when he live streams his podcast. And now all of a sudden you're getting that audience there that is for the culture. Like, yes, they're talking about sports, but it's more than that. And it's some of those in-between touch points that I think have probably been on the periphery of sports. I mean, it's similar when we spoke to Robbie Lyles at AFTV. They're not actually officially endorsed by Arsenal. And there's probably a reason that Arsenal shouldn't fully endorse them. But there's also the argument that there's a lot of attention being paid to some of those people on the periphery that, to your point, they're making money off of the IP of whatever sports organization that is, but they're not collecting any of it at the moment.
And in AFTV's example, they're giving a lot of value. They're making sure fans are talking, staying connected. So it's just getting that balance right of how you make sure everyone's getting their fair dues for what they're delivering in value to the sports ecosystem. I make it sound easy. It is a nightmare to work out how to do that. But that's got to be the magic sauce. That's got to happen somehow at some stage. It may never happen because we don't even know where big tech platforms will take us in the next few years. And what happens with media, given what we've seen in the US, particularly around X and all these other platforms now fighting it out for attention, and the sort of stuff you get served on them now is pretty awful. So yeah, I need to probably get more ruthless like you and blocking a lot more stuff so I can get a bit of a better curated experience from what I see now.
Yeah. So moving forward into 2025, we got a list of questions. Some of them we've kind of touched on a little bit, but we'll dive a little bit more to them. But the last one you just ended there is the question you've got listed there is, what's next for big tech? We've seen, like I said, Netflix making a jump. Amazon is still feels like making very strategic moves without going all the way in. Apple's kind of tipped around a little bit with MLS. And I'd actually say, interesting, one of the other 2024 reviews is whether or not the Vision Pro is already dead within 12 months. Because I know virtual reality and all that's not new, but I think some of us held out hope that if Apple was investing and putting money behind it, that it might take it off. But like, it doesn't seem, at least within the first 6-8 months of launch, that it's going necessarily that way. But for you, when you're looking at big tech going forward into 2025, any expectations or anything that you're thinking?
Yeah, I think where we've got to now is that big tech has been crying out for a long time that sports, you're doing it wrong, do it our way, it's better. It's better for us, and therefore it's better for you because we'll amplify and help you. So I just think that now sports has now come to the understanding, all right, we have to take their lead, unfortunately. So we're going to have to follow what they say and what they do. So I just think they're going to continue to try and build on the relationships they're building with sports. If you look at YouTube, I think they're going to double down, triple down, and trying to be a destination for sports to have live and non-live content. They've been working on having live sports made available. The WSL deal we talked about a couple of weeks ago with YouTube, and that being the core platform for them for a lot of their championship matches as one example of loads. I think they're going to keep pushing for that and pushing therefore ways to get the audience, get the reach, and then just help them use their data to try and sell more ad partnerships. I think the other thing you're going to see is all the other companies trying to be that aggregator still. Amazon's going to continue to lean into that. Apple is a bigger question mark, though. What are they actually going to do here? They've done this MLS deal. It's still a bit bizarre that that's really their only core deal they've done. They feel primed to make another big move of some description or give up completely or move away from it completely. The noise is coming from the MLS. Don Garber, commissioner, saying, yep, we've got more subscribers than we expected. Yeah, they're keeping all their cards very close to their chest. And we're still sitting here going, what's going on? How can the MLS possibly grow when it's behind and within the Apple TV ecosystem as its primary place? So I feel like they've got to make a move, but are they just, is it a fight? Is it a knife to a gun battle? Is it a fight that's worth fighting when you've got Netflix making moves now, everyone else trying to find their own way? Only thing I can see is Apple trying to become more of an aggregator, a bit like Amazon can be. And you just start to see more of these minimum guarantee style deals with more content made available in more places. And they just become more sticky as destinations. And those big tech companies keep leaning into that. That's where I think is the most logical direction. I just can't see them spending money en masse in the industry. I know Amazon sort of not surprised us, but they did the NBA deal, which was a pretty significant shift for them. But they only really spend majorly in the US on the NBA deal and the NFL. They're proper needle movers. Everything else is about these aggregator, minimum guarantee style relationships and visibility on their platforms. And I think you're just going to see more of that. It's just got less risk attached to it ultimately for everyone involved, well, particularly for the big tech platforms. They don't have to commit loads of media rights costs to still be able to create a lucrative relationship.
Yeah, well, to the point of all the media deals being done, there's not really a big move for Apple really to make if you start thinking about what's sort of left out there. Now, I say that as if the NFL hasn't always found a way to splice their deals up into making more things. And I'm sure if they open up their wallets, someone would find a way. But it seems like, I'd heard that they might be the new streaming partner for the Premier League when that deal comes up, but that's still going to be several years away. But, it may be tough for them to do anything beyond that. But I don't know. I agree with you, Nick. From the tech space, I just you talked about YouTube, and is there a reason why YouTube, perhaps, in your opinion, is better suited to be able to take a bigger stake? Because it's not as if Amazon doesn't have the money to do so, or Apple doesn't have the money to do so. But what is it about YouTube that you think puts it in a better position to compete in this space?
Well, all the data shows that their audiences are just growing and growing and growing. More consumption time on YouTube as a platform, just because it's able to serve and fill the void of general leisure. So people just checking on their phone, killing some time. You know what X can do, what TikTok can do. Well, YouTube can do a pretty good job of that too. They're holding audiences in every which way. That could be from short form to medium form to longer form, and the connected TV experience is really, really good these days. And I just think they've got that connective flow of entertainment. You know, if you go to YouTube, you can find what you need. Right, they're the second biggest search database in the world outside of the traditional Google platform. You can go to Google on any medium, and you're going to be really happy with what you get. You're going to get content you want to consume at a click of a button or in a super quick search. You can't get that breadth anywhere else. So I just think for the simplicity of a consumer, I know I go to YouTube, I'm going to get something to watch and consume. I'm happy with that. And that they've just got all ends of the spectrum absolutely nailed. And then they're trying to add more and more monetization layers to the organization or to the offering for partners. That's still pretty light touch, but they are getting there and they are improving. And if you listen to the podcast I did a few weeks ago on the WSL and their thoughts about how YouTube plays a role there for them, the reach is something they really value because it massively helps those conversations with brand sponsors. And it's a predicament, that sports has to step away from the rights approach, but they can back it up by getting you really strong audiences, and they're staying and they're watching properly. They're not just like on TikTok where they stay for a few seconds and disappear. They're holding audiences to watch that content in long form. And that's because their connected TV experience is also so great. So they are in the driver's seat of in every genre, not just in sports.
Well, the last of kind of the big tech, and maybe you could argue they're not necessarily big tech, they're more kind of media, but Meta with Facebook and Instagram, TikTok, X, it does feel like we've sort of gone to a point where I can remember, I think the first episode of StreamTime was with Rob Shaw at Facebook at the time, and they were still looking at live streaming. And we've seen TikTok do a little bit of live streaming of some different events, the IPL, sorry, not the IPL, was it the IPL, the Cricket World Cup that did some live streaming on vertical? Like, we've seen a little bit of it, but it doesn't feel like that's necessarily going to, I don't think, change in the near future. They're going to stay in their lane. But I guess the one interesting bit is there any reason you think X should be concerned? There's obviously been all kinds of controversy with Elon Musk, and we've seen a couple of European football soccer teams saying that they're going to leave the platform and exclusively move to Bluesky. But we've also heard rumors that the NFL is going to double down and do more on X. I've still actually yet to make the migration to Bluesky, despite multiple people telling me to try it out. More just, I'm a bit lazy. I've already followed all the accounts I want for fantasy sports. I don't want to have to go do it again. But do you think, the last of this big tech store space, is X actually in trouble? Can Bluesky be a competitor? Is X, I don't want to use the argument too big to fail because Blockbuster failed and other businesses like that have failed, but is X maybe a little too ingrained to just completely fall apart regardless of what Musk does?
Oh, big question. I would say firstly that the trick with Bluesky is it is trying to basically be a Twitter or an X. X has kind of lost its way. Firstly, if you are on Bluesky, reach out, sign up, find me on there. I'm Sports Pro Nick, as I am on all platforms. So make sure you subscribe to me anywhere you can. But I think X hasn't really got a clear USP. It's sort of sitting in between a bunch of them. It's got a bit of video on there. They've been big on talking about the monetization bit they offer. It's still got its secret sauce, which is that real-time nature that it can play in terms of when there's big news stories. However, when I go on there now, I get fed all sorts of random stuff. Like, it's normally just spam. It's just spam stuff that they're trying to, the algorithms are pushing me to. So that doesn't really fill me with much confidence. Bluesky, I think with any social media, if you can start from scratch with an experience, you can start to at least build out what you want for a while. And then you see sort of where it goes from there. I think X will keep playing a role. It's still got a pretty big audience. They're trying to improve their monetization offerings. If you sign up as a subscriber, they make the big pointer. You can drive monetization through the platform. With other ones, you can't do that really to that level. So I think they'll still keep playing a role. I think they'll still keep playing quite a role. It'll ebb and flow. They've got too much of an audience. I'd love to see the stats and data now. Because they've gone private, you don't get visibility on that anymore. You'll just get a post from Elon Musk. And we've seen when he talks that 50% of the time you basically, or more than 50%, you can't really rely on what's being said. We're supposed to be on Mars already, per his previous quote. So hard to work out what their direction is going to be, but they'll keep playing a role. I can't see them just dying off and falling off into an abyss. They'll find a way to keep it going. Yeah. So, and Blue Sky's good. But the thing is, you got Threads, you got Blue Sky, you've got X. They are all very similar. And I find it difficult. There's some benefits and pros and cons, but it's quite marginal, to be honest. So I think if anyone was going to get more of my time, it would probably be Blue Sky if it does flesh out. But at the moment, because it's so early, I get served a lot of the same people and same content, which I want a little bit more diverse output. So it'll interesting to see if they can make it work as they project. But it's just a bit crazy. If you go onto Blue Sky's website, it looks exactly like Twitter. It is really almost like, I'm not sure if it's what you call it, a slap in the face or just an overt FU or whatever it is, but it's a bit bizarre how much it looks like. The UX is almost exactly the same. I just find it a bit obscure.
Over the holidays, I'll make sure to check it out. But moving forward on to another topic for 2025, and it might expand a little bit beyond there, but what direction do you think European football is going to go? We've talked about most of the major leagues in Europe have now signed deals. There has been a degree of stagnation. We've seen UEFA change up their Champions League. And I know we're not here to talk about competitions and structures and stuff like that, but ultimately those things are all impacted by the broadcast deals. And the broadcast deals are what keeps teams happy. And that's partially why Man City has its 115 charges, is partly because it's relying on PSR, which comes from broadcast money. So despite we're not here to necessarily talk about competitions and on-field stuff, the broadcast deals that are signed off the back of it are very much a large part of it. And there's a lot of different things going on, Nick, and just sort of where your thoughts are on where this is potentially headed.
Football's such a fascinating sport, fascinating situation. You've got such dependency on these broadcast rights deals. You've got the whole media landscape basically being turned on its head. You have all these investors that have come into sports to try and leverage the value that football provides to fans and the growing valuations of these clubs, which we've seen go through the roof over the last decade or so. And all at the same time, what pretty much any expert or anyone who's in the industry and been working it knows that the model is not fit for purpose. It's holding together. But you've got sports clubs or football clubs that are hemorrhaging money to try and stay afloat in some leagues, or hemorrhaging money and still get knocked down into the next tiers. And once they lose their place with all this equity being thrown into them, they're kind of not doomed, but they are in a place where they're running uphill or walking uphill. So I find football in such, and then you have the transfer stuff going on behind the scenes, the money, the extraordinary fees and salaries and transfers that are paid. It's unbelievable. If you were to build football again from scratch, there is no way it would be built the way it is. But it is. And so therefore, I don't know how you can possibly get to a place where it transitions into just a more fit for purpose model. I don't really see any benefits to the current model as it stands today relative to what consumption behavior is like. So I think it's in a real predicament. I think it's just going to have to keep papering over the cracks, make some moves in different markets to try different things to see if there's a way to mitigate some of those pressures. Ultimately, I can't see why any investor would be paying over the odds for a football club right now because the risk is so significant. You know, the CVC, La Liga deal on media rights and what CVC did with League One on media rights is now looking like one of some of the worst bets in the industry we've seen. And if they keep going south, that's going to be a huge loss for all parties involved. So I think they're in a really, really tricky place. Fortunately, most of the other sports in Europe in particular don't have to have those pressures. They can craft, sort of shape their own journey, their own destination still, and pivot their approach without significant pain points, but football is in a whole different place.
Yeah, I know the football purists will hate me. Even in the office, they got mad at me when I said the Premier League as a business would be better if there was no promotion and relegation, if it was just a closed league. And I just don't think the European Super League is going away. I did make the comment, I think the first Super League will be college sports and football in America. And it is seemingly working out that way with the NIL. And I think at some point you will see the Georgias, Ohio States, Alabamas sort of close themselves off. And I think I see a lot of similarities in European football. You look at Ligue 1 in particular, PSG is a massive brand. And at the moment, the rest of the league is ultimately holding back the broadcast values. And at some point, PSG is going to want to be able to compete with Bayern Munich, is going to want to compete with Liverpool, Juventus, all these big clubs. And they're not going to be able to do it if they don't get their money. And obviously, given who they're owned by, the same people that are likely to fund a European Super League, and we know Real Madrid and Barcelona were two of the people that were very keen to make this happen, it does feel like there's going to be a degree of cannibalization where in order to keep up the status quo, the only way to make money is to look to create some sort of super league that, yes, it might disrupt the rest of the football pyramid. Yes, it might piss off all the purists, but I can't see any other way they're going to make a significant amount of money. And I think there's going to be enough big teams that are like, I don't want to carry the weight of everybody else. And you say it can never happen, but like I say, college football, for those that pay attention, like the conferences have been totally changed. It used to be the conferences were based on geography. There were these rivals that were decades old. And now USC and Oregon are in the Big Ten. Like the Big Ten's in the Midwest, and these teams are all the way on the West Coast. And you're seeing teams coming to the SEC. Like, just because you've got tradition, like college football has plenty of tradition, and they've completely destroyed it in about a 24-month window. And it feels like there's a lot of smoke. And I feel like the European Super League is going to happen whether people like it or not.
The problem I have with the Super League is not the points that you've talked about there. It's more to do with the fact that you've got that tribalism, that fandom that really it's at a domestic level. I think if you talk to a fan of Bayern Munich, PSG, maybe not PSG, but Bayern Munich and most of the others, their excitement comes around when they've got a local derby or a match with a local team, Borussia Dortmund or etc. Them getting excited about like playing Chelsea, maybe, but it won't be at the same stratosphere as like those big clubs, those domestic clubs. So I think that's the predicament you've got, is the thought process, particularly around someone like Ligue 1 around Paris Saint-Germain. They are in a tough predicament, but I personally think that, and they've gone for it. They've tried to win the Champions League. They failed. They threw the kitchen sink in it. I just think they're going to sort of streamline that business and let it just still dominate Ligue 1, be at the top of the food chain, compete in the Champions League and hope it works. And that's kind of their place. Everyone else can keep fighting it out. I just still can't see how the European Super League would solve that lack of fandom around those competitions around, unless if you built a European Super League from scratch and you said, all right, actually, you guys will own, so Paris Saint-Germain, you're going to own the French team, like France, and it's like a franchise for each country, and the countries are like the brand, and so there's a bit of patriotism in it. I could see that, but I can't see excitement for, like, I don't know, some of the other clubs that are like Tottenham. You won't see the whole country get behind it. You know what I mean? Like it's their tribalism. A Tottenham fan will be massively want to make sure they beat Arsenal. They want to beat some of their local rivals. They don't care nearly as much as playing in the ESL, in my view. That's my speculation. I'm not a top tier football fan, but I just don't see how you overcome that, and then see what we've seen with the Club World Cup, and see some sort of broadcaster commit billions of dollars to offset the losses for the lack of activity in some of those other leagues, or the lack of value, because inherently, if the ESL pops up, the value of the local league and the value of Champions League will diminish greatly. So how do you transition into that? That I can't see it happening.
Yeah, the only other thing is, as of today, I've seen confirmed that Saudi Arabia will now host the 2034 World Cup. So I don't think money and investment from the Gulf state is necessarily going to slow down. If that means funding a Super League, if anyone's got the money to do it, it's them. But I get it, Nick. There's so many people that are going to hate it, but I'm going to keep banging the drum. I think it's going to happen. But one of the other things, Nick, that you touched on a little bit earlier about sort of what we are seeing as a trend is more and more money going to the top end of the sports world because it is so premium. There's less of the pie to go around. What the playbook is going to be for the tier twos. The tier threes were always going to be tough, but they're niche enough. Our friends at the Cowboy Channel, if you're a fan of rodeo, you're going to do it. It doesn't matter how niche it is. But for some of those tier two, they're not necessarily niche. They just happen to be tier two. What is the playbook going to be for them going forward?
I think it's actually becoming quite clear now. I think it's got to be a really strong presence on a YouTube platform to have that audience building there, which is a mix of live and non-live. You've got to have a good quotient of live matches on free-to-air, getting as much reach as possible in as many markets as possible. And then you've got to have an OTT offering, which is exciting, it's different, it's got added tools and tricks for the top tier diehard fan. It could be extra statistics, it could be different viewing experience, multi-screen experiences, whatever it might be. They've got to have that available somewhere. Does it need to be in your own OTT channel, or could it be with a third party? That remains to be seen. But I think that is the fundamental playbook now we're seeing everyone take. And then all the other platforms are focusing on short form to complement that and build audiences to drive to those sort of 3 or 4 key channels. But ultimately, the thing that is basically the playbook, like how you splice and dice that up, that depends on a bunch of factors, like how many games, what sort of other partnerships you have available to you in those respective markets. But if you want to go global, if you just want to build out a scalable media business, you need scale, 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 and then a really good working sponsorship advertising team to try and maximize the reach that gives you. Because that is still, at the moment, sports is still a really tricky challenge with that. Even if you're doing the numbers, you've got to be able to sell it well to potential brands. And that is still tricky in this environment. It's not following the lens of like a programmatic. If you deliver X audiences, I'll give you Y. It's still a really blurry space. So that really, for me, is the playbook going forward. All the other things around monetization are still in their infancy, and we haven't seen enough of that yet to really know if that's going to move the needle in 2025.
And so what role does that leave OTT for different sports properties in the sense of, I remember when I went to my first Madrid summit, it wasn't the Madrid summit then, it was Sports Pro OTT. And the idea around it was building these OTT, not, there's only 2 T's, there's not 3 T's, 2T OTT platforms. The idea is bringing people in, drive subscriptions, collecting first party data. Is there still a role for OTT for these? If the play is around more scalability, accessibility, discoverability, is there still a role or a function for OTT within a system that is, perhaps, wanting to be at scale? You might not necessarily, people might not discover it as easily, but is there still a role for OTT?
I think there completely is. I'm actually really bullish now that the technology is getting better and evolving, that OTT's role can be so important in that mix of super serving fans. If you think about, what we've talked about before about us and like the NFL Game Pass and how valuable that is and was to us as fans of the NFL. Every sport has a group of people that want more. They want more access. They want more information. They want more content. They want a different experience to what they're getting through the traditional means. So that has to be made available. My view is I would definitely be, if I was running a sports property, I would definitely want to have a dedicated product where you can get that first party data, you can sell, and you can generate meaningful revenue for this if it's additive. If it's just a place to watch the live game and nothing more, then that might be where you can look elsewhere and let people stumble across you. But if you can wrap into a product, a proposition that is really additive for fans, other than just having some matches available live on different channels, that's where an OTT can be such a powerful tool with the engagement, with the data, just the different things you can do from that experience. And then as the technology continues to improve, monetization of e-commerce and all the other things you can do with selling, ticketing and so forth, and using that data to help partners understand how you can sell sponsorship deals and the like, how you can basically provide the connectivity to this type of audience set. That's going to be super valuable for sports if they have their own OTT product. If they rely on a third party, they can still get some of that access, but they're going to be missing some pieces of that puzzle. So I don't think it's either or, but in my view, if I was running, I would want to make sure we had our own platform. Just the question is how much you invest into it and what are your expected results.
Fair. It makes sense. And I think that's probably one of the things we've talked about is just it's not a silver bullet. It shouldn't. If it's your only solution, you're probably in trouble. But it should be a part of a more comprehensive outlook into that. Now, one of the other things, Nick, that you've mentioned a couple times, we've spoken about Amazon, Sky's in this bucket as well here in the UK. YouTube doing a little bit is this sort of everybody moving to be an aggregator. And I guess the question for me, Nick, is sort of if everybody's aggregating, does anybody stand out as a particular USP, or can someone accumulate enough to have such a stranglehold? And perhaps you could say Sky's gone and done that. But with all these people trying to be aggregators, is there enough space for there to be multiple aggregators, or will they all sort of eventually kind of look the same a little bit?
Well, I think every aggregator that I can't even say that word, aggregator, that I have to get a bit more Aussie to say it. That's what it is. Aggregator that exists in the industry typically does have some sort of USP overlaid on the aggregation piece. What I mean by that is, say, Amazon has their Prime membership, their Prime video offering is overlaid on it. So the fact is, if you're in a Western market where Amazon's available readily in your market, Prime as a membership offering is really strong, and the Prime Video just laid into there is a addition that you can't really refuse, because you're not actually having to pay any more for that access typically. The same would be, in a different sense, it would be what YouTube has, because they have the full audience experience and engagement. Being a single stop port of call for someone to go consume content makes a truckload of sense, because people are already going to this platform a lot already. So becoming more of a robust single destination makes a load of sense. It's when someone tries to build an aggregation platform but don't really have that X factor to be really meaningful in someone's lives. It's just kind of sitting in a halfway house. DAZN's trying to do that as the single sports destination aggregator with some of the deals they've done, but I think they need a bit more still. That's why they did that deal with the NFL at the time, was to sort of set the scene of what they want to build. I think they need a few more deals like that to really solidify what they're trying to be, and that's trying to be a single sports destination. I also think they need to lean heavier into being an editorial outlet like ESPN if they want to do that as well, but that's probably a separate topic. But I think you're going to keep seeing aggregation. I think you're going to see big tech companies continue to try and find a space in that mix just to be of value to people. So, or at least a choice. You want to be in the top couple options for a user, in the same way that we saw people worrying about how many subscriptions were enough or too much for a subscriber. I think you want to have how many destinations does any one user need. And typically, I don't know, my rule of thumb, rule of one, I guess for me, is about 3 is probably all you would really need as a destination to browse through. If you have any more, you're going to get lost. So they probably want to be in that top echelon and still be able to manage those relationships with customers, and then push them into other means they may have.
It almost makes me think, just like from even like the connected TV space, like you're just like, how many destinations does one need? And I'm just thinking about my connected TV. I've got Amazon Prime, Netflix, Apple TV, YouTube, and DAZN. Those are and DAZN is strictly just for NFL Game Pass, but those are kind of like my 4 apps. And I get the apps are going to be slightly different, but the whole connected TV space, I'm on an LG, but you'll have your Rokus and things like that. It did make me stop and think, okay, on my connected TV, how many destinations am I actually traveling to based on how many potential places it may have on the platform for you to actually go to? It's a good way to think about it in that sense.
Yeah, the connected TV space is I think just going to become more part of the conversation as we move forward as to how important it really is in this day and age. I remember a line that Ralph Rivera used, who's the ex-MD of the NBA and EMEA. It's like, it's just about the biggest screen available. You've got to just make sure that you've got a great experience on the biggest screen available to the user at the time. And in some markets, like say in India, the mobile device is more often not the biggest screen available to a lot of people. So that experience has to be exceptional. For the others in Western markets, they may have multiple TVs at home and everything and alike. The smart TV experience has to be nailed on. And that's why those bigger players have prioritized that for a number of years and are really in the pole position.
Now, I'm going to say fast, and I'll mean it in 2 ways. And sort of how fast will advertising expand and evolve as a revenue stream? Because I remember probably if we would have had this conversation a year or 2 years ago, we would have talked about FAST as in terms of, free ad supported television being a more prominent player. And it's not that I think FAST is necessarily dead, but it does feel a bit as though that maybe didn't take off as much as we might have thought. But we still think, seeing people like Netflix and Amazon move to ad supported models, that there is if they're doing it, it's surely going to trickle down into other spaces. But to a degree, how fast will that necessarily take off?
In my view, it has to happen really quickly. I think that the predicament is that when I talk to sports properties and rights owners out there with their platforms, is they're still having to take a very kind of like manual one-to-one approach to sell that advertising. Eventually, it's got to become part of that media agency, media buying ecosystem more closely and generate the premiums it has. That takes a while to get there because of what we've talked about before around the media buying space and how tricky that is to navigate and see it evolve. But it has to happen really quickly. For now, you're just going to see lots of sports properties and platforms going to market, actively selling to ad buyers, brands, and selling in a one-to-one perspective, selling the dream of sports. That is not a mass adoption play. That is going to take a few years to get to a place we're all really happy with. But there is way more people in those roles and way more sports platforms taking that approach now. So it should move pretty quick over the next 12 months. How quick? I'm not really confident yet. We've seen anything in this industry, particularly in Europe, which is like happened overnight or happened within 3 to 6 months. I think you'll see it. What do you call like a cascade effect, where more and more will do it, more will see that it's working, and more will follow pretty quickly. But they're going to have to work out how to do it, which for some is easy. Some it's quite difficult. Depends on what sort of tech partners you have and whether you're doing it yourself or whether you're working with a major platform.
It is interesting. I think the point you made just around the personnel. I look at Sports Pro Madrid, and I just look at some of the job titles. And you had Warner Brother Discovery, sort of vice president of advertising, DAZN, head of advertising for Spain, and like I don't feel like I saw some of those job titles 5 years ago. And it's not to say they wouldn't have been doing advertising, but like it would have been a part of somebody's role, as opposed to there's now someone at a very senior level that is exclusively dedicated to that.
Yeah, completely. Particularly, I mean, at the bigger platforms, they have had those roles in place, but they haven't been looking towards sports specifically. They've just been focused on prioritizing those media buyer relationships and traditional advertising means. Now they're coming into sports more because sports is the next big opportunity for them. It is big. They are in a fortunate position, like a Warner Brothers Discovery is an example, because they have existing relationships with advertisers to go, hey, you're doing this with us already. Why don't you look at this? That's much easier than, say, a sports property going to market and never having done it before and saying, hey, would you be interested in sponsoring or advertising on our sports property where we manage some of that output, the inventory. So that's going to be the tricky bit for a lot of sports. And that's why the people best placed to maximize the monetization of live sports is still going to be those big tech and big streaming platforms.
So to wrap this up, Nick, we've talked about quite a few things, but everyone's got to make a big bold prediction, things like that. Who do you think? You can either do one of each, you can pick one or the other, but whether it's a sports property or whether it's a platform, who do you think is going to make a bold move in 2025?
Who's going to make a bold move? I would say the Premier League is gearing up for the bold move. We talked about the IMG stuff, but they're gearing up for some bold announcement, a launch of a platform. I'm hearing countless noises that they're going to. So it wouldn't be that shocking. There might be another move at a global scale to come from someone else. So, the people like the Formula One would be just so well positioned to make a bigger move with a bigger partner. Like it was threatened or rumored that maybe Netflix might last cycle in the US. Now all the moves they've made, this makes a logical time. And that would be quite significant because the shows, the races are every other week. It's got that link with Drive to Survive, which is so prominent. I'm not sure if that's bold anymore, but I feel like the moves we've seen with Netflix, or if we see a major sports property go to another platform in a fairly exclusive manner, that is pretty significant. So I'll go with the EPL, and maybe we might see them do a big deal with one of those big tech partners, being Apple or alike. But I don't think they're going to do that yet. But I think they might launch some sort of D2C service of prominence, perhaps by the end of the year.
Interestingly, you named a couple businesses that I was going to shout out, and I think one of them is Netflix. I do think they will make another big move. Formula One is one of the deals expiring, but the other one that's expiring is the UFC, who have been partnered with ESPN for some years now. And again, would it be shocking because it's part of the TKO, umbrella group, and the WWE recently moved over to Netflix? I think that the UFC could follow that and move, and I think that would make sense. And the UFC has previously had original content like The Ultimate Fighter and stuff like that could it pop up and do a number of documentary series or things like that on Netflix. I think it makes a ton of sense, and that'll be for me. I think Netflix is going to continue to expand in the sports portfolio, and I think UFC will be the one to make the move.
That's actually a very good prediction. It's a very good prediction. Makes a truckload of sense given all the moves they've made with the WWE and all the points you raised. The only reason I would see that they wouldn't do it is because the ESPN just comes in and massively throws the kitchen sink to hold on to the rights because they've been such a successful property to have on ESPN. But if Netflix want it, they've got the cash to burn, and it will give them one extra really solid piece of appointment viewing pretty much week in, week out that few could rival.
Yeah, well, we didn't talk about it, but it will be interesting to follow ESPN in 2025 if and when this move to an ESPN Plus streaming platform fully takes shape. It'll be interesting to see how that goes, and could be the type of thing we talked about. It was 2024 year that people will look back on. I think the ESPN move to streaming will be something that people look back on as either validation of streaming or shit, we should have never gone there.
Yeah, that would be. I would subscribe to that if I was in the States for sure. If they launched a full-blown ESPN streaming service, the time is coming. So they've been adamant that it's coming soon. Obviously, Venue Sports is supposed to launch in the meantime, and that hasn't happened. So whether or not that comes to the fruition as well is something we'll have to watch for.
Yeah. Well, everybody, we appreciate you for spending another year with the StreamTime Sports podcast. By the time you hear from us again, we will be into 2025. So thank you once again for, being with us for another year, and we'll catch you in the new year.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great holiday. Now, before you go, if you liked what you heard today, be sure to rate and review and just let me know what you think on social. You can find me on most social platforms as SportsProNick. And please do spread the word of the podcast. There's no better way of marketing than word of mouth, whether that be in person or on social media. And if you don't like what you've heard, or you think we should be doing more or less of something, then reach out and let me know, as I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, Streamtimers. Until next time.